So without these companies, we have no choice, and with these companies, we also have no choice. How convenient.
So the other day, a self-declared socialist space musician by the name of Ian Parsley tweeted out one of those anti-capitalist memes about how the free market just creates redundancies. This one had 12 chicken sandwiches from different fast food restaurants that are all apparently indistinguishable from one another. You've probably seen one version of this meme or another, whether it's about Dr. Pepper-like sodas, Hallmark holiday movies, which, to be fair, are basically interchangeable. I think that's kind of the point. Or mini SUVs, which most certainly are not. If you think that a Dodge and an Audi are the same thing, then you're too stupid to be helped. The general claim is that we're overwhelmed with useless choices, and that competition between firms is wasteful and has led to superfluous products that go far beyond what people need. It reminds me of a certain personality here on YouTube.
And does anybody really need more Oreos?
Don't think that I'm just going after low-hanging fruit here. Twice failed presidential candidate Bernie Sanders lamented the overabundance of deodorant during his 2016 presidential campaign. As Kevin D. Williamson wrote at National Review, Senator Sanders here communicates a double falsehood. The first falsehood is that the proliferation of choices in consumer goods is correlated with poverty, among children or anybody else, which is flatly at odds with practically all modern human experience. The reality is precisely the opposite. Poverty is worse where consumers have the fewest choices. For example, in North Korea, the old Soviet Union, the socialist paradise that is modern Venezuela, etc. The second falsehood is that choice in consumer goods represents the loss of resources that might have gone to some other end. That, if only we had one kind of sneaker, then there would be more food available for hungry children. While Bernie Sanders is not exactly clear about what he thinks the solution to this is, there are people here online who are a tad more forthcoming. Amazingly enough, there are still passionate defenders of central planning.
Historically, planning was practiced in several countries. First and foremost amongst these is the USSR, the country that began as a backward land of peasants, devoid of industrial production, that within 3 decades became a modern nuclear superpower that conquered the cosmos. Now, this should go without saying, but modern planning will look very, very different than what it looked like in the USSR on account of our radically different conditions and levels of technology. For most of its existence, the USSR only planned a small group of inputs, around 10,000 out of an economy of over 10 million outputs, by hand. All of this in light of constant international vilification, sabotage both internal and external, military threat, diplomatic isolation, economic sanctioning, on and on. The very fact that they managed to achieve what they did with these constraints is nothing less than impressive.
And you know what? I actually appreciate their honesty. All of the garbage you hear from segments of the online left about how they just want to democratize the workplace, or how they just want America to be like Denmark is, I think, just that, garbage. It's why Richard Wolff, Mr. Transform the Workplace by Democratizing It, loves to cite the economic growth of the Soviet Union as a point in his favor.
In the 20th century, the fastest growing metric, the fastest growing GDP in any country measured was the Soviet Union.
Soviet Russia, for those of you who don't know, was not a collection of worker-run cooperatives. It was a centrally planned economy. They paid lip service to the idea of democratization. A Soviet was some unit of production, like a factory, which was supposed to be controlled by workers democratically. That's not how things ended up, of course. It resulted in an authoritarian, centrally planned state, which is exactly how I think other efforts to democratize the economy would end up. When people fail to adhere to what leftists think is ideal, and produce more Oreos or shoes or types of chicken sandwiches than we supposedly need, the desire to make the economy conform to their plan will supersede democracy. As Williamson wrote, this is a very old and thoroughly discredited idea, one that dates back to Karl Marx and the anti-capitalists who preceded him. It is a facet of the belief that free markets are irrational, and that if reason could be imposed on markets, which is to say, if reason could be imposed on free human beings, then enlightened planners could ensure that resources are directed toward their best use. This line of thinking has historically led to concentration camps, gulags, firing squads, purges, and the like, for a few reasons. The first is that free markets are not irrational. They are a reflection of what people actually value at a particular time relative to other things that they might also value. Real people simply want things that are different from what planners want them to want. A predicament that can be solved only through violence or the threat of violence. As Williamson also goes on to argue, these planners are not the enlightened angels some imagine them to be. They're human beings who have their own agendas and incentives that don't necessarily align with the broader public. The broader public is, of course, just a collection of individuals who don't necessarily have the same priorities or interests as their neighbors. But even if we assume that there is one actual public interest, and that the planners would be these Vulcans only acting in that supposed public interest, they still wouldn't be up to the job, as the job is impossible. More on that later. First, I want to point out the irony that the same people who complain about how competition is wasteful for creating an overabundance of choices are the same people who complain about market consolidation. If they're not posting some stupid meme about the redundancies of capitalism, they're posting this one about how everything you buy at a grocery store is controlled by 10 different companies. Therefore, there's an illusion of choice. They usually talk about how this is a problem of monopolization, which goes to show that they either don't know what that word means or they don't care. Monopoly means you only have one choice, not 10. My friend Kirk Wilcox has an excellent video debunking this meme. I suggest you watch it, link is in the description box below.
First off, notice which companies are missing from this chart. Large supermarket chains. We're talking Walmart, Target, Kroger, Costco, Trader Joe's, Vons, Meijer, and I'm probably forgetting a few. Many of these companies offer their own line of products that compete with a lot of the products that are featured in this chart. Amazon could also be considered a competitor in this context. With the way Amazon has been developing their own line of products like laundry detergent, batteries, and even coffee over the years. Of course, when Amazon starts making these lines of products, they're accused of being a big, scary monopoly. Woo! Going back to Walmart. Walmart has long been accused of being a big, scary monopoly. And now Kroger is even being accused of being a big, scary monopoly. So without these companies, we have no choice. And with these companies, we also have no choice. How convenient.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that there are indeed only 10 choices. Actually, let's do them one better. Let's take a look at Lance from the Surf's go-to example of market consolidation, beer.
As I stated previously, these companies will devour one another until they have complete monopolistic control in their field. It's for this reason today that in America, 9 banks control the majority of wealth and assets we depend on. 8 food companies control all the products you see in the grocery store. 5 media companies control all the movies, television, and radio podcasts we listen to. 3 technology companies control the vast majority of social media in the world. 2 companies produce the vast majority of beer in America.
So the beer market is insufficiently diverse for Lance. What exactly are the consequences of this? Do we not have enough choices? When I go to a liquor store, I certainly don't feel that way. Now, like a good Milwaukee boy, I only drink piss water beer. But my brother, on the other hand, always seems to be trying some new, trendy microbrew IPA that tastes like garbage. But he seems to like them, and lucky for him, there seems to be an unlimited supply of new ones. Also, if we look at the Consumer Price Index, we see that yes, there has been some inflation in food and beverages over time, but it's been outpaced by wages. I would love to ask Lance what level of market consolidation he thinks would be appropriate. Exactly how many beer companies should control what percentage of market share. I would also love to know what those results would look like versus what they look like now. And again, lest you think I'm picking on bottom feeders here, Bernie Sanders hasn't exactly been quiet on market consolidation either. In fact, in his new book, It's Okay to Be Angry About Capitalism, he goes on a long screed about how there aren't enough news companies in America.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to see what's happening. Media companies are abandoning local journalism because they aren't making the profits they demand. Consolidation of media ownership at the national level is mirrored at the local level, where most of the daily newspapers still in existence are now owned by chains that owe their allegiance not to the communities they are supposed to serve, but to hedge fund managers who have no interest in journalism.
So, for those of you keeping track at home, capitalism has left us with far too many kinds of deodorant, but not nearly enough media companies. Capitalism is simultaneously wasteful because competition produces redundancies, but it also causes consolidation, which does not leave us with enough options for where we ought to go for our news. I, for one, think that these people just attribute any economic malady, real or perceived, to capitalism. They seem to think that capitalism is just this catch-all term for anything bad. Either way, these people seem to believe that if they were in charge, they could do a better job of coordinating economic activity than markets can. In my experience, people who believe in economic planning don't know the important role prices play in the coordination of resources and competing desires. This is why they're so gung-ho about implementing price controls and other price-fixing schemes like subsidies and tariffs that manipulate market prices. And yes, price manipulation is a form of central planning. Left to themselves, what prices communicate is how much demand there is for a given product or service relative to all the other products or services people may want. Planners have historically failed to appreciate this, setting prices on their whims or to serve political ends, with no appreciation for the potential ramifications of doing so. As Soviet economists Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov wrote in their book Turning Point, Revitalizing the Soviet Economy, efforts to centrally plan the economy through price setting led to more waste, not less. For example, in 1982, in an attempt to stimulate the production of inexpensive fur, the Soviet bureaucracy increased the price of moleskin from 20 to 50 kopecks per pelt. State purchases increased, and now all the distribution centers are filled with these pelts. Industry isn't able to use them all, and they often rot in warehouses before they can be processed. The Ministry of Light Industry has already requested Gazkomsten, the committee in charge of setting prices, which I'm sure I mispronounced, twice to lower purchasing prices. But the question has not been decided yet. And this is not surprising. Its members are too busy to decide. They have no time. Besides setting prices on these pelts, they have to keep track of another 24 million prices. The Soviet economy was plagued with oversupplies of certain goods and shortages of others. David E. Hoffman describes the dismal state of the Soviet consumer economy in his book, The Oligarchs.
The senility of Soviet socialism thrust its failure in their faces every day. Often they dreamed of drinking a certain scarce tea with a yellow label. The leaves were finer and cut thinner, and when they brewed it, the tea was a rich reddish brown. The tea came in a yellow pack with an elephant on it. Supposedly it was from India. But there was a desperate shortage of this yellow packeted tea. It was impossible to find, and no one knew if it really came from India. But if you spotted it, you willingly stood in long lines for it at any time. Then there was the canned meat. The cans were discarded army rations, and everyone knew it. But fresh meat was nowhere to be found. In the provinces, people went for years without seeing fresh meat in the stores. The state dumped the tinned meat army rations on them. If they saw 20 cans, they bought them on the spot. They hoarded it. They hoarded everything, just in case. Canned meat on spaghetti was a meal to savor. There weren't many kinds of pasta either. The thick, long, grayish kind took forever to cook. They dreamed of the tea with the elephant, the stewed meat in cans, and perhaps real spaghetti. Sometimes they could obtain better pasta, like the finer types from Italy. They couldn't buy it, but they could, with great effort, get it. This was the story of their life. Although the Russian language had a verb to buy, they preferred to say to get or to take. They would say, I took a half kilo of butter. What you could get or take did not depend on money, but on connections, on luck, on fate.
Bear in mind, that was at the end of the Soviet Union, not during the worst of the Stalinist 5-year plans. As Shmelev and Popov elaborate, this whole thing was simply impossible for bureaucracy to get right. When Alice eats or drinks something in Wonderland, she either begins to shrink or becomes enormous, and she can't get back to her normal size. In actual fact, Gazkomsten finds itself in a similar situation. It systemically either underestimates or overestimates the actual cost of a product and cannot hit the nail on the head. At best, it is able only to correct the most obvious price disproportions several years after they appear. Everything is interconnected in the world of prices, so that the smallest change in one element is passed along the chain to millions of others. Calculating prices with an acceptable degree of accuracy is as hard as balancing the plan for physical output. This is not the personal opinion of an economist or two, but a statement that has been mathematically proven with great precision in the theory of optimal planning. In indicative planning, as well as in directive planning, the 100% efficiency possible in theory turns out to be unattainable utopian nonsense in practice. It is theoretically possible to turn the world upside down, but only if you have a point of leverage that does not exist in practice. Not only was the moleskin anecdote an example of wasted material, it was an example of wasted labor, as the hunters who they paid for the skins spent hours of their day doing something ultimately unproductive. It also led to overhunting, which is dangerous for natural habitats. Don't get me wrong, there is waste in capitalism as well. There are unsuccessful projects that yield no economic benefit. However, through market coordination of prices, valuable information from these losses is communicated to other producers who can go on to change their ways, far more quickly than the Soviet bureaucracy can. Gary Gersel, author of The Rise and Fall of the Neoliberal Order, a book not overly complimentary of capitalism, was interviewed on The Majority Report, a left-wing show, several months ago. Gersel described how the system of trial and error helped companies within the United States produce personal computers that were affordable for families, something the Soviet Union was never able to do.
Sometimes markets are being set up to allow market activity to occur. So I think the idea that we can say free markets are completely a myth, or that there's nothing to a freely operating market abiding by certain rules, I would regard that as a mistake. And a case in point is the IT revolution that occurred in the United States. And if you think of how the IT revolution occurred and its various phases, there are some people who argue that everything about the IT revolution was made possible by government support during the Cold War, developing the initial computer systems and so on and so forth. And I would say yes, that was crucial up to a point. But if we're to understand why the United States became the home to this industry and not the Soviet Union, then we have to recognize that there were opportunities created for innovation, technological advancement, allowing 10 or 15 different models of the personal computer to be invented to see which one would triumph in the end. And the triumph of Steve Jobs and Apple was not preordained. It was not preordained that IBM was going to be sidelined. If there had been no market opportunities, I think the United States would not have become the kind of home for this industry that it became.
Capitalism, like evolution and the scientific method, is a process that learns from its mistakes. It's far from perfect, but it has corrective mechanisms built in that lead to great efficiency over time, and actually allows people to meet other people's material needs. Central planning, on the other hand, is more akin to intelligent design or creationism. People with a superficial understanding of the economy think that they can just build whatever needs to be built, without any mind to the externalities they'll create along the way, and failure to coordinate all the resources is just one of the problems. There's a reason why the Soviet Union did impressive things in the space race, but couldn't stock a grocery store. Launching a rocket into space is a difficult, but relatively straightforward question that hard science can answer. Keeping grocery stores stocked is a very different problem that doesn't lend itself well to science. And that's what central planning supposedly was, scientific socialism. Again, it's economic creationism. And unfortunately for central planners, they're not God.